Good evening, everyone. We're very happy to have you here and think that you will find this enormously productive and important. And to begin the evening, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Kravitz, who is the director of Jews for Judaism and also the local police presence here this evening. If you don't understand that, he'll explain, to introduce our guest speaker.
As you heard, my name is Rabbi Kravitz. I'm the founder and director of Jews for Judaism. We are an international organization that works to help people use their critical thinking skills, help young people cope with peer pressure, and help people respond to the questions posed primarily by groups like Jews for Jesus. Therefore, the play on words, Jews for Jesus, Jews for Judaism. And over the years, we've seen certain forms of mind control and manipulation and thought control being used even by some extreme evangelical Christian groups. And in my research to learn about this, in the early 1980s, there was a conference on mind control being held at UCLA at the Neuropsychiatric Institute. In those days, the focus really, surprisingly to me, had to do with brainwashing that took place in Korea, in Vietnam, POWs. And I met this young individual who was charismatic. That was me. And he was Jewish, but I didn't know it at first because I asked him his name, and it said Stephen Hassan. I said, "Are you from Lebanon? Are you a Sephardic Jew?" And it turns out he's actually Ashkenazi. And at Ellis Island, when his grandfather came to America, they changed the name. So he really is Jewish, and he's an MOT. Everybody know what MOT stands for? Member of the tribe. And we have been friends now for over 30 years. We've consulted together. We've helped each other. Steve came out a while ago and did a conference for us for Jewish educators. I love his books, by the way, Combating Cults of Mind Control and Releasing the Bonds, which are on sale in the back of the room. And after the speech, you'll be able to get one signed. And I'm not going to really say much more, except this should be the beginning of the growth of understanding about how mind control works, how it affects us. If anybody watches Lie to Me, the segment that was just on was all about mind control in cults. And also, I do a lecture called The Power of Persuasion. The flyers on the back table as you leave. And you can actually see this lecture online. And if you pick up the flyer as you leave, you'll be able to get the web address and watch the flyer. And with no further ado, my honor to welcome to Los Angeles again my good friend,
Steve Hassan. Everybody mispronounces it. It's a real honor to be here. I've been a fan of Rabbi Wolpe's work forever and read a number of his books, and so I'm really honored to be here. And tonight is November 18th, which is the anniversary of Jonestown. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Jonestown, November 18th, 1978, a U.S. congressman was murdered, and 911 other people were murdered by Jim Jones in Guyana. And it's one of the most pivotal events in terms of my life choices to devote myself to helping liberate people who are enslaved by psychological chains and physical chains in some cases. I'm profoundly moved to be free to speak my mind here with you. I know that there's a number of former members of different groups out there. And I basically, for those of you who haven't heard me speak before, want to say that I grew up in Queens, New York, the youngest of three. I have two older sisters, and I was a creative writing major in college. I skipped 8th grade. I was not a joiner. And I had broken up with a girlfriend. Actually, she dumped me, Rabbi. I was 17, I was 18
You want
years
me to
old,
talk to her?
or
Is that
19.
what,
I was, heartsick, and I was basically deceptively recruited at the cafeteria of Queens College by people, play acting as students, which allows me to make a central point early on, is nobody joins a cult. Nobody volunteers to be enslaved. They're caught at a vulnerable moment, a situational variable, death of a loved one, illness, breakup, loss of job, moving to a new city, state, or country, something. And people who are not educated about the techniques, the deceptive techniques of how these individuals and groups operate. So there's no informed consent in terms of the process that I'm describing here. People are seduced. People are spoon-fed little pieces of information, but they're giving lots of information about their history and background to the potential recruiters and manipulators. And these individuals are using that information to devise a plan for how to bring them in. And if the women said, "Hi there, I'm with the Unification Church," I would have said, "No, thank you, I'm Jewish," and goodbye. And I said, "Are you part of some religious group?" They said, "No, not at all. We're just a student group." And if you go to my freedomofmind.com website and look up Moonies in the search engine, you can find a front group list that's some 60 pages single-spaced of entities that the Moonies use to recruit people. And I organize them by religious groups, political groups, business groups, etc. Which brings me to another important point, which is that people have stereotypes that people who get into cults somehow shave their heads or wear robes, or that all cults are religious. And my experience is that's not necessarily the case. There can be political cults, therapy cults, so-called educational or large group awareness type groups. And more prevalent than ever is just a single dominating person who enslaves another person and separates them from their family and friends. And isolation is a typical tactic in order to gain control of somebody's mind. And in my particular case, I went from being anti-joining groups, question authority, long hair, voted for McGovern, thought Nixon was a crook, was in the last draft lottery to go to Vietnam, and within a period of 2 months, I cut my hair, put on a three-piece suit, believed God wanted Nixon to be president, dropped out of college, donated my bank account, went and fasted for 3 days for Nixon to be president, believed the Holocaust was a necessary event because the Jews didn't accept Jesus. And I was Shoah educated. This was not a superficial understanding for me. And yet, they had gotten control of my entire life being. And I was a fanatic. And I was signed on to believing the Koreans are the master race, that Korean is going to be God's language, that all other religions would be abolished, that there needed to be a theocracy to take over the world, that democracy was evil. And of course, the Scientologists were a cult, but I wasn't in one. Except in my cult, he would line up thousands of men and thousands of women and say, "You marry you, and you marry you." And people would have 5 minutes to decide who they're going to marry, and then be in these mass marriages. Has anyone seen the videos? You need to see the videos. In fact, there's an excellent BBC documentary online called Emperor of the Universe. Just put it in quotes in Google and watch that. It's a fascinating documentary on the cult that I was in. And at the point that I fell asleep at the wheel of a van and drove into a back of a tractor-trailer truck at 80 miles an hour on the Baltimore Beltway and was pried out of the wreckage and in a hospital for over a week, away from the cult, sleeping. And by the way, I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night. It was part of the control. I reached out to my sister, the one person who didn't say I was in a cult, who didn't say I was brainwashed, who wasn't part of Satan's attack on Father and the family. And she just said, I love you and I miss you. You have a nephew you haven't seen yet. Can't you just come up and visit? And it just melted right to the real me. It wasn't that I was disillusioned, I want to leave the group, but I love my sister and I missed her. And I said, promise me you won't tell the folks, because they were satanic and negative. This is quotes, by the way. And she promised, but later she told me it was the hardest promise to break she ever did. But she realized I wasn't thinking for myself. And it led to an intervention. And on the fourth day, and it was a voluntary intervention, not because I wanted to leave, but I wanted to prove that I wasn't brainwashed, and I wanted to prove that I wasn't under mind control. I was that emphatic. I knew this was my free will, this was my choice to believe in this fat Korean businessman who was an ex-felon. On the fourth day, I literally remember saying, I don't care if he's like Hitler. I've chosen to follow him, and I'll follow him to the end. On the fourth day, and then a chill went up my spine, though. I didn't say anything yet, but the walls were starting to come down. Unfortunately, on the fifth day, the day that my father said, look, I just want you to listen for a few days, and if you want to go back, I'll drive you back myself. I just want to know, and your mom wants to know that you're doing it with a full deck of cards and with information about what is really going on there so that you can make an informed choice. And the final day, it was reading one of Moon's own speeches where the thought entered my conscious mind for the first time in 2.5 years that Moon was a liar. And as soon as I allowed that thought in, it was like a house of cards going plop, 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 plop. Because the whole worldview was based on the presupposition that Moon was the Messiah. He was the greatest man in human history, sinless, smarter than anyone else, greater than anyone else, and at the point of realizing he was a liar, because I had heard him lie, and he taught me to lie as a leader in the group, but it just wasn't allowed. I was taught to do thought stopping, and that's a major technique that cult members are taught to do on themselves, to shut down any doubt, any criticism, any fear. And one of the pieces that helped me the most get out was understanding what brainwashing actually was, and using the work of people like Robert J. Lifton and Margaret Singer and Edgar Schein, who were all military intelligence sent in the 50s to find out what is brainwashing in the military context. And as we went through the criteria, it was like, that fits, that fits, that fits, that fits. So in my waking up from the trance of believing that I was superior to everyone else, that I had the truth with a capital T, I wept for hours, and it was very humiliating and embarrassing to say, you know what, you were right. It is a cult. It took me 3 months to admit it was a cult, and that was brainwashing. And I basically took Lifton's model and Singer's model, and I reduced it to a 4-part model, which I called the BITE model, and I believe you have a handout on your seats. It's also probably going to be on the Temple Sinai website, and it's also on my Freedom of Mind website for those watching this on video. But it basically talks about controlling someone's behavior, controlling someone's information, controlling their thoughts or thinking, and controlling them emotionally. And I say that the more any organization or any relationship controls these elements to make a new identity that's dependent and obedient on the authority figure, the more it goes on the destructive end of the continuum. Healthy influence, unhealthy influence. And I think unhealthy influence basically wants to clone people. It wants to take people away on the healthy side of their authentic selves, their inner voice, their true talents, their own free will. It seeks to make people dependent robots or clones. It wants to make them, in my old cult, it was think the right way, feel the right way, act the right way. And it basically meant to be a small Sun Myung Moon. When I got out of the Moonies, I wanted to get everyone else out of the Moonies and warn people about this nefarious plot to take over the world. And I was very naive, and I really didn't know much about other cults. But as I started meeting other people, I met an ex-Scientologist, then I met an ex-Transcendental Meditation person, then I met an ex-Hare Krishna person. We started comparing notes. And the same patterns, the same criteria of mind control fit, even though the ideology was very different in each group. But we were all surrendering our free will to have a new identity that was dependent and obedient on our authority figure. And we all had similar struggles to reintegrate into society, especially to deal with family members and friends who basically didn't have a clue and understood what happened to us. Temporary insanity, maybe. But very, very few family members and friends take the time to actually learn about the social psychological elements that go into indoctrination. But there really is a science to influence. And that knowledge is out in the marketplace. And my hope in giving this talk is to raise awareness and to educate not just parents, but young people too. And the rabbi was asking me before, is college campuses where it's at, where cults are recruiting? I said, internet. Internet, internet, internet. That's the new terrain. And a lot of parents don't understand the internet, or they don't understand social networking and such. And all I can say is learn real fast and have your kids teach you. And start teaching them, just as, someone needed to tell me, Steve, you never give your credit card number to someone who calls you up on the phone that you don't know. Just never, no matter what the story is, you never, ever, ever do that. People need to be educated that if something's legitimate, whether it's someone a person falls in love with, if they're real, they'll stand up to scrutiny. Take your time. Don't just give all the information about you. Find out about them. The simplest thing you can do now in 2010 is go on Google or the other search engines, put the name of the leader in quotes, plus cult, plus brainwashing, plus criminal. Now, don't just look at the first 10 hits, because a lot of cults clog the search engines with their own web pages, so do a little more digging and understand that if something sounds too good to be true, if somebody says, hey, you can make $1 million part-time selling vitamins, and they wearing expensive clothes, expensive watches, and have expensive cars, it's like, show me your income tax returns. Or if they say, come to a weekend, it's going to transform you, and you say, tell me what's going to happen there. And they say, it's a secret. I don't want to spoil it. Say, forget it. I'm not going to pay money for something that I don't know what's going to happen. Learn to be an educated consumer. I could go on, but I really would like to engage in an interaction with you. But I want to say that I've been touched for 34 years in my travels around the world at how profound the human spirit is and how much it wants to be free, how much it responds to genuine, unconditional love and authenticity and honesty, and doesn't like to be manipulated, and people don't like to be exploited and used. And so I'm experiencing people born into these groups who are leaving in their 20s and 30s, and man, are they messed up. But they can't take it anymore. And in terms of some of the religious groups, they just say, I don't care if I'm going to hell, I'm suffocating. Or they have medical problems, and they get kicked out of the group because they're asking questions or something. The problem is not going away, folks. In fact, I think it's the preeminent issue of the 21st century. That and climate and global warming. I think the whole issue of influence and how to to find and use ethical influence and oppose unethical influence is so very vital. Thank you again for having me.
As with everyone here, I think there are probably so many questions to ask. The first thing that occurs to me, though, is can you describe what a deprogramming is like? What does someone do to deprogram?
So when I first got out of the group, it was called deprogramming, and literally at first I was taken against my will in the sense that I was sitting in my sister's living room and they took my crutches away, and I had a cast from here to here. And basically, there was a period of time where parents could have an ex parte conservatorship, go to a judge and say, Your Honor, my adult child was a victim of artful and designing people. Can we please have custody for 1 week to expose them to former members, explain mind control, etc. And they were granting them, and they were quite successful, and I did a number of those cases. But then the ACLU jumped in, and a number of people said too much potential for abuse, and it was stopped. And I really think we need to revisit that as a legal option for loving parents. So we needed to, and after a year of doing forcibles or these conservatorship interventions, I just said, this is not for me. This is too traumatic, even though it worked most of the time. It was too taxing, because when you're in a mind control cult, you're given a phobia that if you leave the group, you're going to go insane. You're going to get cancer. You're going to be hit by a car. In my second book, it is chapter 10, is all about phobias, and I have several pages of the most common phobias. But the bottom line is that if you have an idea hypnotically implanted that your life's going to fall apart if you leave, and then you're put in a context where you're being forced to consider leaving without being explained what is a phobia and how to cure it, it's very traumatizing. So it became exit counseling. It became a voluntary thing where the person was asked, would you please prove it to us that you're not under mind control? And I've developed a program called what I call the strategic interaction approach, which is basically working with family members and friends and developing a team of people who understand how mind control works, who understand the loaded words that a particular group uses, and devising basically a customized strategy for how to start breaking down the walls of indoctrination and empowering the person's real self. So it's much more moving from a kind of a medical model of, trust the deprogrammer, he'll fix everything, to giving the tools to family members and friends and letting them, because they're the ones that the person has the history with and has the loving relationship. That if you can just get someone to be open enough to go and start looking at websites and considering and looking at movies, it's shifted the entire paradigm.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you about. Was in both your account of the way you were brought into the group and the way you were taken out, it seemed to me that there were two different elements. One was cognitive and emotional. Yeah, as your sister said, I miss you, and that touched you. But on the other hand, you thought Moon might be a liar. And one was emotional, the other was intellectual. So what combination, I can understand why somebody would be brought into a cult purely emotionally. If you're feeling alone and you're feeling vulnerable and people are warm and they're loving and there's a community, that attracts anyone, cult or not. Mm-hmm.
We call that love bombing.
Love bombing.
And in fact,
is there an intellectual defense to that emotional appeal?
Yeah, I believe we need to use all of our minds, the critical thinking and the emotional and the intuitive, and to listen to our inner voice. But I think ultimately, in terms of how to protect your children, I really need to get children with former members and do role plays and describe different scenarios of how this operates, so people can actually see that it's not a mystical thing, but it's actually a very human pulling on people's, pushing buttons or pulling on people's strings.
I'm going to try to be
difficult.
No, not difficult, but it's realistic. I will be difficult.
Please.
But that I won't try. I won't try. It comes naturally. But the average parent is not going to actually role play with their kids.
No,
with
I'm
all the
not
others.
suggesting parents.
So I'm saying, or expose them to former cult members. They're just not. They're not going to do it. Just like they're not going to follow. Like most people don't follow most good pieces of advice that people give them because there isn't time and there are other things and so on. So, all right, you go home to your child. We've just heard you speak. You have a few minutes. What's the critical, like if you had to boil down, as inadequate as it is, what's the critical thing for a child to understand or a college student to understand? They're going to go home and call their kids in college, and before they say goodnight, they'll say, by the way, I heard a cult speaker, and
don't do that. That's not going to work. I think the best thing, but it needs to be genuine, is that parents say, I heard this guy give a talk. The link is here. I would really appreciate it if you take the time to listen, because I really would like to have a conversation with you about it.
And they'll say, "Oh, I know about cults. I would never be part of a cult. I'm smart.
I understand, but maybe one of your friends might at some point, or maybe some love relationship might be using unethical hypnotic techniques on you or something. The point is to engage in a conversation. And I mentioned to you beforehand a wonderful book that I just finished called Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error. And I really recommend it highly because it's basically a book that summarizes how we're perceptually wired inaccurately in terms of interacting with the real world. All the social psychological stuff, or not all, but a lot of the principal things. In my interventions, I typically talk about the Ash Conformity Study, the Milgram Obedience Study, and the Zimbardo Prison Study. And if you don't know what those three studies are, again, go on the web and look at some of the videos or look at some of the slides on that. But it shows us, the Ash Conformity Study shows us the power of peer pressure and group influence. Right. The Milgram Obedience Study shows the power of authority and how basically 2/3 of everybody doing this test electrocuted another human being in less than an hour because a guy in a white coat told them to. The third is the Zimbardo Prison Study, where healthy people were divided between prisoners and guards, and they had to call off the experiment after 5 days. It was a 2-week experiment because people were having nervous breakdowns and some of the guards were becoming sadistic. And it just shows the power of our adaptability as human beings to different contexts.
I would say two quick things about that, because I was just at a Festival of Ideas in Mexico, and I had dinner with Zimbardo, actually. He was one of the people there, and he's now working on heroism. That's his new project.
Heroic Imagination Project.
Yeah, exactly.
.org.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It's an amazing thing. And one of the things that he said was, he had these people, these preachers, give a sermon about the Good Samaritan, and how you have to take care of somebody, and if you see someone in the street and so on. And after, this was all arranged, after they gave the sermon, then they were supposed to go and give it at another place. And along the way, there was somebody that they had staged who was, in fact,
needing help.
The people who were told you're late didn't stop to help him, almost without exception, even though they'd just given a sermon about how important it is to stop and help people. The people who had all the time in the world did stop, which shows again how infinitely manipulable all of us are, even
right. Or if you're there, but there are 5 other people walking by, how
then
you're less likely to do it. It's the solution of responsibility.
So, so when you speak to college students, what do you tell them to look out for? Like, what are the warning signals? And along the way, if you would you say something about what you said to me in the office about the hypnotic techniques? Because I thought that was fascinating and powerful about the looking for several minutes and so on.
So, yeah, I've been studying hypnosis since 1980. It was kind of the missing piece for me of understanding social influence was the actual linguistic. And the long story short was that I was taught to do hypnotic techniques in the Moonies without being consciously taught it. I was just emulating it behaviorally. And I would talk like this in a very special voice, manipulate the sound waves, and go on and on and on. I'm not going to do it. What would I say is that, hey, you're a human being. It could happen to you. I know you think that you're invulnerable and you're superior. However, interesting to note that if somebody new comes into your life, understand real friendships take time to evolve. There needs to be reciprocity of information. And that if you find out that the person has not been honest, that's a big deal. Don't ignore that. In fact, go and specifically ask critical questions and such. Ask, what group are you with? Who is the leader? What do they believe? What is expected of you when you join? You know, those types of questions. Will they lie to you? Probably. But having asked the question and them giving that response, you're not going to get very far before you realize they've lied to you. Now you have the internet. So I'm saying go to the internet and go to freedomofmind.com. There are other resource, trustworthy sites to see, is there information about this group? Be wary of falling in love. I hate to say it, but especially if you fall in love with the most beautiful woman or the most beautiful guy, and the next thing is they want to bring you to a Bible study or they want to, bring you to a therapy group or something. Your radar should go, ming, 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 ming. I heard this guy at Temple Sinai.
Right.
So I was mentioning, if you go on search engine, you do hypnosis plus sex, you'll find hundreds of websites that will teach covert hypnotic techniques on how to rape somebody, man or woman. And the techniques are out in the marketplace. And rather than walk around fearful, my message is educate yourself. Understand what it is. If somebody is touching you and they're a stranger, please step back. Do not touch me. There's a entertainer named Darren Brown. Have you ever heard of him? Darren Brown. You can go on YouTube, Darren, D-E-R-E, Brown. He goes up to people on the street and they're giving him their wallet, their cell phone, and their keys in less than a minute using hypnotic techniques. He's going into jewelry stores with blank pieces of paper the size of money and walking out with jewelry. And it's like, how is that possible that someone can do that? Well, if you're unethical, or in his case, he says, it's just entertainment because I want to show that the proof that it can happen, it gives you a certain humility of just being conscious. And I'd also say, be wary if anyone ever tells you, don't tell your mother, don't tell your father, or come away for a month, or come away for a week, or something like that, or tries to give you some story to separate. Get away from them. And, get some help, get some reality testing. Because the bottom line is, if these people or these groups are telling the truth, it will stand up over time.
Did you ever recruit anyone else when you were in the group?
Many people. Yeah. And that was part of my motivation initially to speak out, was because I wanted to get them out of the group. I can honestly say they're all out now, but some of them stayed in upwards of 20 years. Yeah. And it's a heartache for me.
So what do you know about human nature that the rest of us don't from having gone through this experience?
It's very humbling. What do I know about human nature? I know that, as I said before, that I believe that we have a spirit. I do believe in the divine, and I believe that we're meant to be unique, and I believe we're meant to question and have free will and struggle, and I think we're meant to serve one another and love one another, and I look at planet spaceship Earth, and I'm thinking we really need the best and the brightest to collectively put our minds together to figure out how we can coexist in a peaceful way and save our habitat. And these groups are siphoning off some of the most brilliant, creative people we have. I can tell you how many clients I've had who were top of their school, top of their class, president of fraternities or sororities, people who were just incredibly talented, people who got sucked into a situation and got mentally imprisoned. I mentioned about the adaptability of human nature. Again, what's so interesting is that we can learn and get out of it very relatively quickly if we're given the right recipe. I mentioned chapter 10 of my second book. I have a 3-step phobia intervention where you're describing the difference between a legitimate fear and an irrational fear, and the structure of seeing a negative movie or having a negative picture in your mind, negative self-talk, and holding your breath, and having basically a panic attack, and positive visualization to neutralize that, positive, confident self-talk, and deep breathing. And step 2 is explaining how other groups install phobias to keep people dependent and obedient. So you don't attack the group head-on, you talk about this other group, and then you ask, do you know anyone who's ever left your group who's happy and fulfilled? Do you think it's possible? How is your group different from this other group that you just agreed had installed a phobia?
And before I ask if anybody has questions or comments to respond to, what about people who are not and have never been in groups? What have you learned about us who haven't ever been in a group that we don't know about ourselves from having been through a human experience that most people will never go through?
Unfortunately, the average person blames the victim and says they're weak or stupid. Those people who get in, it's not me, and it's this real distinction in their minds. They tend to treat people in cults that they meet badly. And remember, when you meet the next cult member, there's somebody's son or daughter, somebody's sister or brother. Maybe the family really wants to be reconnected, and to give a little love and give a little attention. Ask their name, find out a little bit about them. Ask them when they've had a vacation. What a radical idea, a vacation. People in cults don't get vacations. You have to ask permission to go visit your mother who's dying in a hospital, and usually you won't even get it, or you'll be sent with a cult member. I really believe that the hope for the 21st century is raising consciousness, raising awareness, helping people to step into other people's shoes and see reality from other points of view. And in that way, we can enlarge ourselves and take the best of other worldviews.
Questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, the bite model.
I just want to repeat the question for those who didn't hear. Is there a list of common denominators among cults?
Yeah, exactly. So to the extent that the group controls sleep and food and your clothing and who you can associate with, that you have to ask permission for major life decisions, that you're cultivated to be dependent and obedient as opposed to deciding what works best for you. Ethical groups are honest, and they tell you up front who they are and what they believe and what they want from you. Whereas all the destructive groups, we were given a different story than what was real. In the case of Scientology, you are told you will get pneumonia and die if you hear what the upper OT levels are before you've gone up the bridge to total freedom. I say a legitimate religion tells you what the beliefs are up first. They disclose it, and I do not believe Scientology is a religion, by the way. So thought stopping, I talk about the black and white, us versus them reality, the loaded language, the buzzwords that shut down thinking. Words should open up our realities, help us to connect to other people, not be thought-terminating cliches, which is a term that Lifton used. There shouldn't be secrets. You shouldn't have to spy and turn your friend in or your wife in to the leader if they're doing something other than what the group is saying. And if a group tells you don't talk to ex-members or don't talk to cult experts, they're evil, they're spiritual pornographers, you should be motivated to say, you know what, I'm an adult. I should find out for myself. I can discern what's real and what's not real, and discern whether or not someone has integrity or not. Decide for yourself. The information control, I talked about thought control, behavior control, and then the emotional control, the use of guilt and fear. Feeling special, you're chosen, so that's the high, but mostly it's about fear and guilt manipulation.
How much overlap is there between all these techniques and cults and mainstream religions? Or certain aspects of mainstream religions?
I basically take the position, here are the attributes, take whatever group you want and plug it in, and if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and has feathers like a duck and has DNA like a duck, it's probably a duck. And that's, well, my lawyers told me I should answer the question.
Right.
Is said group a cult or not?
Sure.
So the question is how to talk to someone who's just in the throes of getting recruited into a group, or is in a group. So the 99% of everybody does the wrong thing. They try to talk to the person rationally, like they used to talk to them before they met the group. And they don't understand the rules have been changed by this organization or this group. And what I say generally in terms of my working with people and teaching them how to communicate is watch for feedback. If you try something and you get a response that's alienating, you want to work first for rapport and trust building. So the best position to take is don't attack the group, don't attack the leader. Go, you know what? I love you. You've made a big change in your life, and I'm confused. Help me understand what the step A, B, and C, and D is. And they're going to say, come to a lecture, or come to the meeting, or come talk to someone else. And what I recommend that you say is, you know what? I really don't want to talk to a stranger. You're the person I care about. I want to hear from you. And you try to get them to go back in micro minutes in the beginning. What is it that you thought that you were getting involved with? And what did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? And it's amazing if you're not attacking, but you're just genuinely curious. You want to step into their shoes. And you say, what was one of your first thoughts when you met said leader? So many times people said this, I thought he was crazy, or I thought he was arrogant, or I thought he was slick, or I mean, it's the first impulse was dead right on, but the mind control got the person to disconnect from their inner voice and that inner reality testing. What you don't want to do is go in unprepared and get indoctrinated yourself into a cult. So the art is really learning what you need to know, the essentials. Try to find former members of the group and teach you the Loden language. Try to figure out a strategy. And what I basically say is core and trust building, information gathering, particularly how they think, feel, and act. And then you can get into what I call freedom of mind techniques, asking the person to step back, step into your shoes. How would they feel if you joined some controversial group? Or step back in time. If you knew then what you know now, do you think you still would have gotten involved? That turns out to be a very powerful therapeutic question. Because when I first was recruited into the Moonies, 27, now it's like, okay, 1976, do you think the world's coming to an end? You know, do you think World War III with the Soviet Union really is happening? And so many things that I was told in the beginning turned out not to be what was going on. But so in other words, an engagement of, hey, if this is so wonderful, convince me, recruit me. But just don't do it alone and get a support group together. It's part of that. It has nothing to do with reasoning. Have you ever seen a stage hypnotist? So go online and look at some of these Darren Bound videos. But stage hypnotists, it's the low end of the whole world of people who've studied hypnotic techniques. But they can literally take someone in a short period of time and convince them that the number 5 doesn't exist, and then ask them to count to 10. They'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and not even realize that they forgot 5. Or they can be hypnotized to be told that their legs are paralyzed and they got to pee really badly. And they'll be on the stage going like this. And people laugh at them. But it's like, how can a human being do that to another human being in such a short period of time? And it speaks about the human imagination. It speaks about co-opting, if you will, the operating system that we're doing for discerning reality. This other person's voice comes in. Abraham was asked if he loved God more than he loved his son. Steve, what? I was like, no. We're praying about it. We think your poetry is right. Are you prepared to sacrifice your poetry? Yes, I love God. I'll do that. And I threw out 400 poems. Unlike the biblical story, it never came out of the trash. It was a deliberate attempt to separate me from what was weakness, my own unique voice. They systematically broke me down and built up a Mooney identity that believed that he was 10 times greater than Jesus Christ. And that Christ was the Messiah, only he failed his mission because he didn't marry a woman and take the Jews and march on Rome and take over the world. What this whole package, but it was not based on logic. It was based on mind control, believing a story.
Marilyn? Does being in a cult share?
When I was in the movies, I know people who are in meditation groups where it becomes like a high that you can get through doing an altered state of consciousness technique. But I think it's fundamentally missing the dissociative disorder and the systematic social influence program to get people to be dependent and obedient.
Yes. What part of the bite model does not apply to mainstream religions?
Off the top of my head, control of sleep, or telling people you can't read what former members of the temple write about the temple, or telling people they can't get medical treatment,
Or hiding information?
or being deceptive in recruitment. I think about it on a continuum. And when you're looking at any particular organization, understand that the organization has many different levels and layers. So someone who lives in their own house and has an outside job is going to have a very different level of cult involvement than someone who's a staff member who's living there 7 days a week. But they're both under mind control, in my opinion, in the sense that they're afraid to talk to former members and afraid to talk to critics, and they're not allowed to go to critical websites.
I think it's also fair to say that, as the rabbi of the synagogue, there's no shortage of criticism of the institution, of the religion, of the clergy, of the congregants, of the,
And the fundamental thing that I love about Judaism,
which is not a bad thing. I think that's
is
a great
we
thing.
question,
Yes.
and Talmud, it's all about not agreeing and savoring that, and not going, we have the truth.
And presumably a cult wouldn't bring you to speak to the cult.
Oh,
right.
Clearly.
I'm just saying. Here's my Exhibit A.
That is, and putting it on your website.
Right, exactly. Yes.
I think there are Jewish cults, Christian cults, Buddhist cults, Hindu cults, atheist cults, therapy cults, political cults. Look at North Korea. I mean, that's the most quintessential mind-controlled political regime we have on the planet, I think, right now. What I'm hoping is this dialogue. You know, I'm not the ultimate authority, even though I've been doing this for 34 years. I'm just trying to say, hey, people, there's this very unique phenomenon. We're aware of how much we've learned in medicine. There's been a revolution in understanding psychology and social psychology. And the people who study what we know and apply it are going to have a distinct advantage over people who are ignorant about it. And so, actually, I want to plug a fledgling project I'm about to begin with my colleague Alan Shefflin at Santa Clara Law School. It's a think tank on influence. And Phil Zimbardo has kindly agreed to be on our board along with other prestigious academicians, and we want to educate people about what we know about the human mind and the difference between ethical and unethical influence, and develop some programs to inoculate people and help them to become better thinkers, to watch a political ad and be able to analyze it and not just react emotionally, actually think about it. Right. Well, a plug for Phil Zimbardo's Heroic Imagination Project. He's really trying to model heroism. And part of heroic acts is just average people stepping up against peer pressure or against some situation, doing the right thing, and wanting to celebrate that and inspire people to be strong. I really believe in the Ash conformity study, showing young people this. And basically, the Ash conformity study was done in the 50s. It was a series. It was described as a visual perception experiment, but it was really a conformity study. They showed a line, a placard with a line, and then 3 sample lines of different sizes. Only they had everybody in the room in on the experiment except the sucker in seat 6. And everyone started giving the wrong answer confidently and congruently. And the experiment was, how many people will keep giving the correct answer even if everyone's confidently giving the wrong answer? Less than a third. 2/3 start giving the wrong answer even though they can see with their own eyes what the correct answer is. And not a single person gets up and measures the lines. Not a single person has the chutzpah to stand up and just put their finger next to the line and go, you know what, 2 equals 2. It doesn't equal 3. It doesn't equal 4. And reality test it. And so, for me, that's the basis for then also telling about peer pressure and talking about drugs and other unhealthy activities as well. But I think modeling it is the best possible thing, and I really believe that former members are the best inoculators, because if you talk with former members, you'll find that they're really smart, they're really intelligent, they're really creative, and holy mackerel, look what happened to them.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. Let's take a couple more. Go ahead.
I'll try to make it briefer. Right?
Where do you draw the line?
I draw the line with the bite model and how extreme, those controls are, and how open the organization is. Not all destructive groups do. I do want to just comment on the jihadi group and tell people about the Quilliam Foundation, which is a British think tank of ex-jihadists, and they're literally challenging the Muslim extremist narrative. And for me, it's one of the most exciting things, and we should be having them give lectures here in the United States and such, but it's amazing how little we're doing to preventively inoculate people from being recruited.
I'm going to see if I can combine some questions. Go ahead. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. The question still is definition of a cult. Go ahead.
You're doing it in 2 hours?
Right.
Good
2
job.
hours seems to me.
Right, no, I get it. I'm looking more and more for ways.
Go ahead.
So there's, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, when I wrote my first book, I started getting hundreds of letters from people who said, loved your book, how come you didn't mention the witnesses? And I said, why, are they a cult? And they're like, I underlined the entire book, what are you kidding me? And I was like, teach me. And Randy Waters out in Manhattan Beach here said, come on out. And I'll introduce you to a few hundred ex-witnesses. And it was like, if it quacks like a duck. And So
that goes back to the question here, which is it's a continuum.
It's exactly. And it's a group that has encouraged people to not get blood transfusions and caused countless unnecessary deaths, in my opinion. But you can walk out of a cult, or you can get kicked out of a cult, but the cult doesn't get out of your mind without an active healing process that needs to be done, essentially. And I think it starts with getting educated about what is a cult and what is mind control, and it proceeds to meeting with former members of other groups. With the witnesses in particular, and other groups that talk about the end times, Armageddon and all this fear and phobia indoctrination, every time you turn on the TV, you're getting triggered. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end again. So it's tough for ex-members, and I have to tell a lot of people, you don't have to watch 2 hours of news every day. You can actually moderate how much of the same news you're hearing. You need to learn anxiety-reducing techniques. There's a healing technique. I think this is really worth mentioning, and I know we're running out of time. It's a very powerful healing technique, and it's basically, with that knowledge of mind control and cults, revisualizing the younger you at different key moments. And this works great for trauma, not just for people in cults, but going back to key moments and saying, if I knew then what I know now, how would I have acted differently? Or what would I have said? Or what would I have done differently? And you're going to know historically what actually happened, but it's an internally very liberating technique. So for me, a critical thing was going back to a leadership meeting with Moon where he said, when we take power in America, we're going to amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people to have sex with people other than those assigned to them. And at the time I said, yes, Father, good idea. And it plagued me for 4 years until I understood this technique. And I went back and revisualized that moment. And I said, you're crazy. You're like Hitler. You want to kill people because they're doing something different than what you want? You're nuts. I'm out of here. And in my mind, I walked out at that point. It was incredibly liberating because the real me never would have said yes to that crap. And so going back to key moments and celebrating the birthday and going into a church or making choices, giving the blood transfusion instead of watching your loved one bleed to death. Even though they're dead, knowing that if you knew them, reality would be very different.
Let's take a final question in the back. Doesn't almost every religion say we know the truth? At some level of certainty. I mean, so what makes this different? I mean, because, by the way, so will a scientist.
I think
he'll say the exact same thing. He'll say, look,
why so many cults have gotten away with so much crap is because a lot of historical religions have said these kinds of things. But I take a 21st century perspective that it's 2010, and
no matter if you argue, as I have done many times in debates with various scientists, or somebody will say, look, in science we know the truth. Now that doesn't make science a cult.
Science does not ever. Real scientists never say that.
They
say they have a hypothesis that they tested.
Yes, but they say that it's as virtual. If you say to a scientist evolution actually didn't happen, what will they say? They won't say, well, you're right, it's a hypothesis, it might not have happened.
In that particular point, my wife is an anthropologist, and she will emphatically say that evolution exists. But the whole art of science is that we have descriptions of reality, and we're prepared to abandon it if we have a better description of reality. So it's not a system that says we have the truth with a capital T.
And where is the subtle shading between a traditional religion and a cult in terms of knowing the truth, in quotes?
So I would come back to honesty and disclosure and openness to other points of view and engagement with other points of view, and not controlling people through irrational fears, of not separating them from family and friends, of allowing them to have sleep. One of the most researched things is sleep. We need 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and the entire country is sleep deprived. Which gives you an impression of, possibly into the mindset of a lot of folks. But we need sleep, and mind control groups almost universally don't allow people to sleep properly.
And because we are not a mind control group, we're going to allow you to sleep properly by saying thank you so much for a fascinating and important presentation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
And it is my hope that we will do this again, and you will all bring your friends, because lots and lots more people need to hear this.
Maybe we'll do more questions and answers, and I'll be in the back with
the books. Signing books. Both books. Cult Mind Control. Forgive me. Combating Cult Mind Control. Please buy them and give them to your kids.